you look at how the war has been going, they've lost over 7 generals. The Russians have. They've lost many more men than they thought they would, more than even almost a decade of being in Afghanistan. And even as they claim that they are getting control over Mariupol, that very critical port that they need, that's not over. There's still 1,000 fighters there. They haven't been able to take control over the steelwork area. There's no chance that, I think, there's no chance that those Ukrainians, excuse me, are going to give up. And even if the Russians claim they have control, they're going to keep fighting, and they'll be fighting against an insurgency. And that means that those Russian troops are sort of stuck there, and that limits their progress elsewhere. So even in the locations where they should have a huge advantage, because there might be other ethnic Russians or Russian speakers, or that they know the area better, the Russians aren't doing particularly well.
To your point, that in Mariupol, they are talking, Russia today, that they would allow for a ceasefire to allow residents that are trapped in those steelworks to leave. Putin last week said that they shouldn't storm these steelworks. Is this an acknowledgement of sorts that potentially that they are not going to gain control here?
And that's a really good question. I think the bigger issue is that I wouldn't trust anything that Putin says, or any of the officials that he has as his mouthpiece. He says something and then he does something completely different. I mean, for years, months, he was denying that he was even going to get involved in Ukraine. And that's really unfortunate, because we need a ceasefire, because it is such a terrible humanitarian crisis, particularly in Mariupol, unfolding. If you look at the whole country, you have 5 million refugees and people that have been displaced, and 100,000 in Mariupol. And they've been using this strategy of basically trying to surround the city and limit their food so that people starve to death. And it's very difficult then to trust this type of leader that says one thing and then does another.
Yeah, and he's done that, as you point out, consistently throughout this invasion. Lloyd Austin also pointed out that they wanted to significantly weaken Russia so that this could not happen again. Is that likely to inflame Vladimir Putin and get him to dig in even deeper?
That's true. It is likely to inflame Putin, but at the same time, that really is the only strategy that we have here, that we need to weaken Russia, to isolate it, weaken it economically, lower its morale. And we already know that troop morale is incredibly low. And we're seeing more signs that there's going to be more effective types of weapons, long-range missiles and artillery and tanks that are going to the Ukrainians. And apparently that's what they need in this conflict at this time, as though the war has changed somewhat. And so there seems to be more willingness amongst the U.S. and other countries to provide Ukraine with these types of weapons. But in terms of what Putin is going to do, this is the type of leader that, honestly, no matter what you say, he's never going to give up. He is going to, stay in there until the very end, and he's still surrounded by intelligence that is basically telling him what he wants to hear, and that he, and Russia rightfully should own parts of Ukraine, particularly eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, and that's what makes this visit by Antonio Guterres, the UN chief, to Russia, supposedly to try and convince Putin to pull back. I mean, it makes it sort of unlikely that he's going to really have any impact.
Yeah, of course, there wouldn't be much of an impact of this visit, but it is symbolic. It's something that the UN really needs to do to apply pressure. I know that Guterres had been trying to contact Putin and had never been able to get a response. He'd had very minimal contact. Guterres had very minimal contact with Zelenskyy. And so he's pressuring on both sides, but it's just very unlikely because of the structure of the international system. You had 141 countries condemn the invasion in the UN, but then you have Russia and China that are part of the Security Council. And so what power does the UN have in this instance? Instead, this visit is largely symbolic and to showcase the humanitarian crisis that has unfolded, yeah, and hopefully plea for a ceasefire, but I think that's unlikely.
Yeah, at least sort of put it on the table to Putin that this is something of his doing and that he needs to, he's the only one who has the power to pull back on this. But You know, you talked about the significant additional resources that Ukraine is getting from the US and elsewhere. How is this going to match how Russia is ramping up with its high precision missile capability?
Well, we've seen already that the Ukrainians have been incredibly creative and adept at using the new weapons coming in to take down attacks from the Russians, and they have a much higher morale, and they have much more incentive to stay in this conflict for a long period of time. So, as the example I mentioned with Mariupol, this is a place that the Russians claim that they have control over, and yet I don't think they're ever going to fully have control over any location that they claim to, because they'll be dealing with an insurgency. And then they're stuck there, and they can't then move to other locations, like, say, going up towards the north of the Donbass region. So this really limits their strategy, what their capabilities are. And this is in the context of Russian troop morale being at an all-time low. So I think having these additional weapons provides the Ukrainians with the added confidence that they can even go on the offensive.